Okay, welcome everybody to our third episode of the Shiny Developer Series and this joint webinar with RStudio Community. I want to especially thank everybody tuning in around the world and for those that have given us great feedback on the previous episodes. And today we are very excited to be joined by our special guest, Mark Edmondson, and we're going to be talking about his Google Analytics R package and how he's been approaching linking Shiny to complex APIs. But let's first do a quick check. Mark, can you hear us?
Hello. Yes.
Great. You're sounding great as well. So we will dive right into it. And before we get started, I just want to remind everybody tuning in that if you have a question, please feel free to type that in the question panel in the webinar control panel, and we will be sure to address those throughout the webinar, and we will have some dedicated time towards the end for the Q&A. So please keep those questions coming. So first, as we dive into this, I want to take this time to let Mark introduce himself to the audience. And Mark, if you could tell us a bit about how you got started with R, as well as how you got started with Shiny, as well as your role at your IIH Nordic, and how R has been a huge help in your daily work. So please go right ahead.
Great. Yeah, well, there's quite a lot there to go through, but as you may hear, I'm British, and I've been working in in a digital agency since about 2007. But in 2010, I moved to Copenhagen, Denmark, and that's where I live and will live for the foreseeable future. I'm in my new house with my wife and 2 kids here and all that, and loving Denmark. And but I've been working in digital agencies in the UK and Denmark, and IIH Nordic is the one I'm really involved with now. And yeah, I mean, basically, I've been I hadn't used R until I moved to Denmark, and we were sort of working with Google Analytics setups quite a lot, but a lot of the work was just sort of technical setup of the JavaScript and things like that, and there wasn't much sort of analysis about what you do with the data afterwards. So we wanted to sort of like look at how do you actually use the data afterwards. And so I started asking around some of my wife's friends, and some people work at a university around here doing physics, and I thought that'd be brilliant to ask. And they suggested, have you heard about R? You know, and I was like, no, I've never heard of R. What's this? And they said this is sort of a data analysis language that you can use to forecast. So my initial sort of use case was forecasting. So I sort of looked around the web a bit and downloaded it and started playing around. And yeah, just sort of took a few courses on Coursera, and yeah, sort of gently got into it through that. And I've been working with Python as well, and SQL and JavaScript quite a lot. But one of the sort of landmarks was that one of the sort of packages for GA at the time was called RGA, and that was done by Bror Skadhammer, and he actually worked at the agency that I am at now, IIH Nordic, and he had developed this GA connector to for his work there. And because he was in Copenhagen, we met up, and yeah, so we kind of yeah, it was good to sort of get involved with it that way. And then kind of like coincidentally, Shiny was being launched around that time as well. It's sort of like 2012. And I was sort of new to R, and I just thought it was part of R and just sort of part of the whole thing that you had to learn. And so got involved with that. And yeah, and I just found Shiny to be really, really quick and easy to get something up and running. And yeah, get something decent looking out. And yeah, and it really really helped in what I was trying to do. And so maybe I should back up a bit as like say, I've got this philosophy of working that we should try and work smarter and not harder. And like in an agency, you're trying to usually you're billed by the hour. And so if you kind of get more efficient at your work, then you actually are paid less, you know, if you're just paid by an hour. So we're trying to break free from that model of being valued on your work that you're doing, not on an hourly rate. And to try and help with that and to sort of help develop myself, I took a 20% pay cut and started working 4 days a week. And then dedicated that remaining day to sort of bettering myself and learning stuff. And that could be music, it could be Python, it could be, but a lot of it turned into R and Google Cloud. And that's kind of the niche that I've developed over time. So yeah, so I just worked a lot with R and Shiny. And then the sort of one big breakthrough thing happened was, well, I had a kid and I had the paternity leave. And during that time, I created the app called GA Effect, which was pulling in data from Google Analytics and using causal impact to show the effect of events in your Google Analytics data, and then using Shiny Dashboard as the presentation. And then all these things kind of all came out around the same time, so I just sort of combined them all together, and I tweeted a link to it, and it kind of went viral on Twitter and all of this. And I still get lots and lots of feedback about it and all of that. So that was really a sort of watershed moment where Shiny helped like increase my exposure and career prospects and all of this, because this GA Effect app suddenly blew up everywhere. And yeah, and maybe it's why I'm talking here today. I don't know.
Well, it's a very interesting story, and the fact that you were coming in at what I'll consider a great time to learn all this, because like you said, Shiny had just been released as you were learning R and learning how to use that for some of the analytics you were working on. And I know from my experience that when we're able to put some kind of sophisticated, complicated algorithm and have a Shiny front end to it, it just increases engagement on your customers. And if you release it in the open, yeah, the whole world can play with that and see that. So it's really a great story to see how you can leverage Shiny to maybe get a bigger audience for the analytics you're working on, and also making sure that they can get the key interactions with the data, the results, and everything like that. So I'm definitely fascinated by that. And we were talking just before we started recording that you had released a really excellent tutorial about how to get set up with a lot of this technology that you've been working on, so that all of us would have the tools to produce a powerful Shiny app that links to some of the packages you're working on. And that was, when I saw that, I was really inspired by it, because it does show that with just some technical investment in terms of learning these frameworks, you can put a really sophisticated application in front of the world or your audience, whoever that happens to be. So
absolutely, and I think a lot of it is about, because I'm working in an agency, and it's a lot about communication of data, trying to get sort of useful information out of data. And a lot of these people like are not professional programmers or even analysts, they just need the headlines. So Shiny for me is a really good in the way that it kind of democratizes that information for everyone. You don't have to sit there with code, not just data scientists who can pull out this sort of effect model or causal inference or anything like that. You can communicate that straight away to users, but then give them a little bit of interactivity so that they can add their own data and sort of play around with dates. So you're not sort of having to handhold them all the time to do that. I mean, I'm very pragmatic actually in all the packages that I'm using and making, is that I need this stuff for work. So I'm really sort of solving my own problems when I'm releasing this stuff, but hopefully helping other people solve their problems as well.
yeah, in fact, that was actually motivation for my next question, is that I wanted to dive into some of the details behind this collection of packages you've been making, that a lot of them do have interesting hooks with Shiny itself. And as you mentioned, you've been learning a lot and working with the kind of the Google suite of analytics, APIs, and things like that. So it does sound like you were quite motivated to share those, and maybe you could expand on some of the other motivations you've had for assembling this group of packages together like you have.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of it is enlightened self-interest in that if I'm working, I think the best way to make good software is to have a lot of people using it. So, and definitely it's helped me that a lot of people are using these packages and then feeding back on the bugs and, you know, helping improve the thing overall. But I mean, it's also nice to sort of give back from what you're doing. Yeah, just sort of, it's really cool to get those messages about, oh, you know, I've been using this to do that and using this to do this. And it's really motivating to get those messages and keeps us going on. Yeah, and you can basically tell what I'm kind of working on at work because a new feature will suddenly appear in the packages, perhaps, or something like that. So, I mean, like when Google Language R came out, that's because I was doing quite a lot of text mining and things at the time. So, yeah, I wanted to get that out. But also Google like make this kind of easier to do because they sort of they standardize a lot of their API stuff. So what Google have is this discovery API, and that's kind of been. I started off with just the one package, which was Search Console R, which is pulling in data which is useful for SEO and things like that. And then partly on the back end of the GA effect going viral, I got accepted onto the Google Development Expert Program, thanks to my ex-colleague Simo Ahava, who's like a giant in digital analytics world. And he kind of recommended me for the program, so I'm, you know, really grateful to him. And because I'm on that program, I got early access to the Google Analytics API that was coming out version 4. And this was kind of like 6 months before it was public. So I needed a way to work with this Google Analytics new API, but had to do it privately. So Google Analytics R was actually a private package for quite a long time whilst we're playing with the API, and a lot of feedback to the developers about how to make it easier to work with and things like that. So it has kind of helped develop the API in general.
Interesting point. And it seems like a lot of these working with the Google APIs is making sure the users are able to get set up effectively, but also whether they're making a Shiny app or just working with R in general, how do you get everything connected to that? And that's where I learned about your really fundamental package, Google Auth R. This is really sophisticated, and I wanted you to maybe expand upon what are some of the technical challenges you've had to overcome to create a package like this and be able to hook this functionality with the rest of your packages in this suite that we've been talking about so that users can quickly create a Shiny app that takes advantage of these interesting APIs.
Yeah, absolutely. So Search Console R and Google Analytics R were sharing the same authentication method. And that was originally based on Google Sheets by Jenny Bryan, who a lot of the code sort of came from. But then when I tried to do it in Shiny, the authentication flow, then the first time I did it, oh, it works. And I gave it to a user, and they could see the previous user's data, which was not good. So
that's not a good sign.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing is that the HTTR, which is the sort of basis for everything on this, it uses authentication tokens, and it kind of assumes that you're working in your same environment all the time. And with Shiny, you've got a different R session sort of starting up each time. And so you can't use sort of the cache tokens or anything like that because it'll give access to previous thing. So I mean, my R skills then were a lot worse than they are now. So I was just hacking my way through how to get this working, because I really needed it working, because I had like 50 reports that I had to show in a Shiny app where the user could log in themselves and then pick their user. But yeah, I had a pragmatic need. I needed this to be done, and certain challenges were. I mean, what basically happens is that you're starting a new Shiny session when the person comes back from the Google authentication screen. So you have to somehow communicate the auth token back to that new Shiny session. so that it recognizes it's the right person to do so. So that was you had to construct the URL and make sure you had good security as well, because you know this is people's data, so having a random string in there to make sure that it's all secure. And then it kind of depended. So I got it working locally, and I thought brilliant, and then published to Shiny apps.io, and it didn't work. And that was because Shiny apps.io had they didn't have the same URL. That the app was looking at a different URL than the one that the user saw on the screen.
Oh, interesting.
So because it was in a Docker container, so it thought it was localhost, but the user was seeing another one. So that didn't work. And then they were really good in sort of helping sort that out. So I think it was Andy shinyapps.io who helped me through that. And so there's a little bit of sort of extra code if you're on Shiny Apps, and it will do something else slightly to get the URL and things like that. But there's actually quite a lot of ways to authenticate. I mean, really, you only need, like, when the user authenticates himself, if you're interested in their data coming back. But then there's all this sort of other sort of ways you can authenticate with just JavaScript. And that's kind of what I use quite a lot myself these days, is just do it all client side in the Shiny JavaScript, and it all runs in JavaScript, and that gives you the token. Or you can do it server side with R and it relies on the URL. But then very recently, well, last year, Joe Cheng of Shiny, he showed a way of actually you can create the UI from a function.
Oh, yes.
Yes. So he showed a sort of proof of concept on how you could use that to generate the URL itself. So the very latest version of Google Author now includes that method. And I think that's the sort of superior way going forwards. So the UI is generated via a function, so you can sort of modify the UI before the user sees it. So what you do is when someone logs in straight away, you show them a UI where they have to log in with a big login button. And then when they log in and they're coming back, then you modify the UI to show the actual app.
That sounds really promising. And
yeah.
as I pulled up the page here to again highlight the really good documentation you've made around your packages. And one technique I really like, and this may be a part of that what you just mentioned, is that you're exposing through your package these custom Shiny modules so that we don't have to reinvent the UI ourselves, so to speak, every time. We can simply tap into these. And a lot of people I work with at work, they'll make this interesting, like, little Shiny app that could be used in different places. And my first feedback to them is, you should make a package out of this so we all can use this as a module. And those that listened to this before know that I'm a big fan of modules. So I was really pleased when you took that initiative very quickly, it looked like, to put this in modules. I just wonder if you could expand on what the development of that has been looking like, and which ones in particular do you think would be most accessible for those that are new to exposing, say, a piece of Shiny through a module? What could they learn from some of the work that you've done here?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, modules really solved the problem for me. Basically, I'm trying to make these apps as little code as possible, and common tasks which I always had was I need a login button, or I need to pick the Google Analytics view and things like that. So it seemed a completely natural fit to use these modules, because these modules sort of came out as I was developing this, and I was like, brilliant, let's do it. And I'm surprised, do you know, Eric, any other sort of packages that have Shiny modules? Because I've not sort of come across many.
There's been a few out there. They're definitely not trying to do as much in scope as this, but I know Ian Little has released a package early on that was almost like a proof of concept of modules. There's been a couple others here and there from some of the other UI developer set of packages, but it has not been mainstream yet. So I'm kind of hoping that more Shiny authors start to take that on, because I think it's really promising.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, and so basically, when I was making my own Shiny apps, I was starting to copy and paste a lot from sort of older ones. And as soon as you start doing that, that's kind of like you should make a function, right, or something like that. And
Absolutely.
that's kind of what the motivation behind the modules were, is that rather than you just have one line there to call all of this sort of Shiny logic behind it. So I think I've got quite deep into modules, because now in Google Analytics, I've got this GA models function, which is a function factory for models. But I would say, if you stick on, so we got these ones. But if you're looking to, and maybe you might have to go in the code, because I don't think if you go on the GitHub, but
sure.
I think just if you do the Google Analytics profile picker is the most simple one to sort of learn from.
I see. Okay.
Because it's basically a table which is downloaded, and then the Shiny inputs is choosing the sort of hierarchical way of picking there's an account which is a super category of a web property, which is a super category of a view, and it sort of drills down so that you can pick the right view to collect your data. So I think that one's a good one. That's a good one to sort of start learning from, because it's like doing. But then if you look at the auth one, all of the auth buttons basically in auth they all have a Shiny module, because a lot of them, some of them when it's server side, more of the code is in the server section of it. Whereas the JavaScript ones, a lot more of the code is in actual JavaScript, which is and that's in the inst folder, and it loads in JavaScript and loads that into the Shiny app. And so it's much more complicated in the on the UI side.
Right.
You see what I mean? So this one here on the screen, the Google Auth, is that's a sort of server side one. So there's more R code in that one. Whereas if you were looking at Google sign-in module, that would be a lot more JavaScript based.
I see. So that's a good balance there, because some applications are going to require the use of JavaScript more fully for various reasons, and then others we can tap into more of the server side. So yeah, we will definitely put links to all of this in the notes when we post this episode on the shinydevseries.com site. But I add to one thing I've been looking for is I've been using modules more for a lot of my apps at work, and also in some of my open source efforts, is finding these examples we all can learn from each other. And so this is a great set of examples here.
Great. Yeah, thanks. And where it's ended up now is that I'm always on this quest to make it as simple as possible for people to get these things up and running. And now I'm trying to get to someone who's like very basic R user, but they want to create a Shiny app. And so this is where the sort of GA models, there's a sort of page on the website, if you can find it, for the Google Analytics. But the GA models, it asks you to send in a function to collect the data, send in the function to do the modeling, and then send in the function to do the output. And then once it's got it in that sort of pre-packaged example, so you see the top example there, to get a Shiny module out, you just need a few lines of code, and you can distribute this to people who can only run that code, say, and don't want to get involved with more functions or something like that. Because my target audience for a lot of this is people who don't use R professionally. They're just using R to quickly get results, and they're comparing it with other tools out there where they've got web UIs and things like that. So it's really time to insight is the sort of thing I have to minimize as much as possible. So I'm hoping that we can get more and more of these examples in this format, and then be able to distribute. It's a way of distributing the examples of what the package can do. And if you scroll down a little bit more, maybe, because it's in that sort of set format, then you can actually create a Shiny app. You can embed it in a tweet as well and things like that.
Interesting.
But if you scroll down a little bit more, if there's a Shiny example down at the bottom, I think, then and it's kind of my kind of best practice for APIs in Shiny modules one of the sort of first things I say is make sure that your data is in a reactive object and you're not trying to call that API every time someone changes something on Shiny, because definitely the biggest bottleneck for your Shiny module will be the API call, because that is going to take seconds compared to microseconds for all the other Shiny stuff. And one of the big sort of benefits of Shiny is it's so responsive. People really think it's fast when they're like using it. And you compare it to sort of Tableau or the other sort of products online, it just feels very snappy, which is one of its big selling points, I think. So you
absolutely. I've gotten that feedback from my customers as well, and we want to make sure that as we're structuring these applications, we are taking advantage of not reprocessing something a certain amount of times when we can avoid it having one time to process it, like you said, maybe caching results from an API and then feeding that downstream to all your output reactives or other output objects.
Exactly.
So
and because
it takes a while to learn that, though. You have to go through it a couple times to really understand it.
Absolutely. But because I've been using Shiny for these sort of applications, that has always been a big motivator for me for the packages, is to get that speed of response. So things like batching, trying to fetch as many results at the same time. Google Analytics actually fetches 5 API calls at once using a sort of new feature of the V4 API. So it actually fetches 50,000 results at once compared to sort of 10,000 from the older API. And then I use the Memoise, I never said that out loud, Memoise package to do caching in it. So if you request exactly the same information, then it will read it from your RAM or from a file rather than making another API call. And that's all motivated by making Shiny dashboards as quick as possible. Because you can't be sitting there waiting for lots of data to load when it's a dashboard situation. Well, at least I don't want to.
Yeah, I've had that same situation. I'll make these analytical type dashboards, and the users of that are typically pretty high level executives, and the last thing they want to do is look at a output that's kind of grayed out and not doing anything for like 10 seconds. They want to make sure they're spot on.
Yeah.
So
it's broken.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, we're having a couple more questions for you, and I want to remind the audience that if you have questions for Mark, please go ahead and type those into the question panel or in the chat, and we'll make sure to address those. But yeah, we talked about a little bit about kind of having this kind of streamlined interface for these dashboards so that you're using the API effectively. Now, I'll admit my experience has not been so much with the Google type APIs. I've been working with some of the other more traditional APIs, or maybe the more basic ones. But one thing I've always wondered about is to take an approach like what you're doing with the Shiny apps that you've been making based on the Google Auth R and all the other suite of packages, is you're letting the user authenticate to it with their own basically login credentials or API credentials, at least making that as efficient as possible. Is that a concept that other APIs or those Shiny developers that want to wrap an API could take advantage of instead of using, say, their own API credentials? Or do you have any thoughts about that?
So you mean if you're, say, like calling well, I think the OAuth 2 system is something that you can replicate so the Google system uses OAuth 2. So
sure.
any API that uses OAuth 2, you should be able to do a similar thing with.
Yeah, I've always wondered, maybe I'll work on maybe finding an example or trying that out myself, because even you have your own, like you have an API for the Google Analytics R to kind of get started, but you also mentioned in documentation you're going to make a lot of calls. Please use your own API, credentials for that too.
Oh, I see. Yeah, well, that's something that you can set that in the code, and that's something that I think is developer side to do, because I think if you're an end user for the package, there's different sort of concepts of projects, and this is sort of a common thing, is that you've got the project where the API runs through, which is and it doesn't actually access the data. you can only sort of see a API call was made, but you don't have access to that data, and that's taking care of the client IDs and secrets and things like that. And then the end user has maybe their own project, which is authentication. And so what you can do is get people to upload their authentication key. And it's more like a JSON key rather than going through the OAuth2 flow. And that means that they would then be using their own Google Cloud project to make the calls. But typically, I would say the easiest way to do it would be to have, if you're doing it internally within a website, within your company, then I think have one Google Cloud project or the equivalent where all the API things go through, but then distribute the service email for that project to your users that you want to use it. That would be, because otherwise each user has to sit there and set up the redirect and sort of various sort of settings on the Google console end, which is a bit less user friendly, I think. And it's actually a debate at the moment, and there's been a recent Twitter poll about whether I should include a default Google Cloud project with the package, and maybe I should get people to use their own Google Cloud console credentials all the time, and so increase the sort of ramp on for users that they have to download this. And it's actually looking like people prefer that from the results. So,
it's a tricky situation to navigate, right? I mean, you want to make it so it's easy for people to get started with the package, but at the same time, you want to make it so you're not breaking somebody's account like your own or anything like that.
I keep applying for increases, and so I mean, it only comes up every kind of year. But we've recently hit the limit of 100,000 calls a day, which is ridiculous. So
wow.
it's just but I think that's probably someone using it in production, and maybe I should limit. You should say don't use it in production. Maybe only make it interactive or something.
I think I just have to maybe be more upfront about when this could potentially be a problem. But at the same time, it's great to see that people are taking advantage of it, right? I mean, it's great.
It's brilliant. So I nag people with a message that people obviously ignore.
Well, sometimes it just goes in one ear and out the other sometimes. You've shared a lot of awesome insights. I think the question I'll kind of wrap up before we go to the Q&A is, as you've been working with these APIs, either from Google or even some of the other frameworks you've been working with, if you had advice for someone that's maybe new to Shiny and they see something they want to wrap as a Shiny app that talks to an API, what are some best practices or other tips you might recommend for somebody that wants to take this challenge on, whether it's for a work project or just want to learn by doing? What are some of the things you've learned along the way that could help them get started effectively with that?
So I mean, definitely logging is a really big thing. Because authentication bugs are really annoying in that they sometimes just say 400 didn't work, and there's sort of 20 different moving parts that it could be related to. Sort of, did I put the right port in? Did I put the URL right? Am I authenticating the right scope? All of these different things. So having really good logging is a prerequisite, I would say. And so I did a lot of logging, but then I had too much logging for when it was all working. So there's these packages where you can sort of set the level of logs, and I've got sort of a version of myself. But basically set a level where you get enough information back that it's useful, but not too much that it's annoying all the time. But then when you need it and you have problems, then you can set the log level so that you can see everything that's going on. And I've even recently increased that where you actually, if you go to logging level 0, it'll actually print, it'll write the response and request to an object in your R session, so you can inspect exactly what was sent and what was coming back. And that was just to make sure that it's everything that you expected.
That's interesting. Yeah. That actually relates to one of the questions I see came through is that also helpful for how you might gracefully handle when the API gives an error in Shiny? Maybe it's a quota, being overmet or things like that. Is the logging mechanism a way you'd handle that too?
Absolutely. I mean, and you have to design to fail, because every API will fail. I mean, it's just the internet. It will fail.
Yep.
So,
it's not 100% uptime, folks. Maybe 99, but not 100.
Yeah. So you have to have like try-catch loops or the equivalent to handle sort of the most common errors that are doing that. And yeah, I mean, try-catch, the documentation for that in R is ridiculously obscure. So I've had to rely on examples from other people. I think Henrik Bergertsen of the Future package, he helped me the most with try-catch. But yeah, try-catch is my friend now, definitely, because then you can read the message that comes back. In some cases, all it needs is a retry. You can just, okay, we'll just try again. In some cases, you shouldn't retry because it can cost you money, if you keep sitting there retrying. So
right.
Yeah, you have to deal with each error as it comes. Definitely.
Yeah, that's great advice too. So I'm gonna take a quick scan. I haven't seen anything come through my way over to that last question. Curtis, did you see any other questions come your way yet? Just want to make sure I didn't miss it. Okay, I don't see any yet. But I do have.
We do have a couple. Did you see the questions?
No, I'm not seeing them for some reason.
No, I don't see questions. No.
Well, I guess one of the questions here is, where did you learn to create these great packages in such short? This is kind of a question for people kind of starting out doing Shiny development work.
Sorry, can you repeat that? It went a bit choppy there for a second.
Sure. Yeah. Where did you learn to create packages like these in such short a period of time? I guess kind of where did you start to start? Yeah.
Well, definitely, I read Hadley's book from front to cover, the Making Packages online book, and I basically just sat there with Search Console R, and I mean, packages, a lot of it is just boilerplate. Actually, you just have to put the folders in the right place and that kind of thing. So once you've got your functions sort of all sorted out, make sure they're in the right folder, and then follow that book to the letter, basically. And I just sat there until until it worked, and then use the R command check a lot to help with all the little notes that come up. But the reason I had quite a high output for quite a while, but I haven't done that recently because basically the maintenance of these packages takes up all of the time that I would be spending on making a new package. I could do more packages, but just looking after these ones is, kind of full-time open source free time in what itself. So that's something I didn't expect. And it's one reason I'm trying to create a sort of community around these packages so that people can kind of help in this kind of thing. So I've started a Slack group and things like that.
Yeah, that's a great point. You have been trying to be proactive on that and getting a network of community together. In fact, I even applied to join the Slack group myself as I start to use this more often. But I think a lot of package authors should maybe think about that as not just releasing it out and then just kind of letting it be there, but there's maintenance involved to make sure that your users are getting, responsive feedback if they submit bug reports, but also making sure they're involved in decisions you make going forward or the future direction of the package goes. I don't think that gets talked about quite enough.
Absolutely. To be honest. And the documentation is more than 50% of the work, I would say, easily. The documentation for me is like what actually sets R apart from a lot of other languages. I mean, if you do the equivalent in Python for Google Analytics, you just get the read the code docs. Code is self-documenting. Work it out yourself. So and it's just like, thanks a lot. When you compare that to the sort of R community around packages, I think that's a really strong argument for using R rather than Python in a lot of these things. But I slowed down. But the real sort of reason I could crank out so many was that this discovery API that I talked about earlier, where you can, there's a function in Google Author called Discovery API, I've forgotten it now, Discovery API, and it'll actually create a skeleton of a package for you based on the, yeah, if you scroll down, is this, yeah, if you scroll down a bit, Discovery, there we go, those ones. So if you click on that link there, you can maybe see the list of all the APIs that Google offers, and there's like 150 of them. So for
Wow.
instance, for like Google Language R, I could request that with that function. It would build the functions for me, build the documentation, build the objects, and then I just have to sort of fill in the blanks and do the documentation. So all of that. So it's not kind of like all over, but it's definitely a really good way of getting started. And I know, you know, there's some APIs on this list I really would like to do, but I just don't have the time to do. But I know some other people now in the Slack group are starting to use that to create more packages. So there's Google Cloud Vision R, which is coming out soon, which I think is half based on that. And there's this Google Auto ML tables by, I think Justin is working on that at the moment. And because Google is releasing stuff, you know, like 20 things a month. It's ridiculous to try and keep up with all this stuff.
Yeah, it's almost impossible, right?
It's just impossible. But, you know, it's really exciting to work with because you can always be working on something new. So, yeah, but you kind of got to sort of, does it fit in with my workflow as well? So, but yeah, I would love to make more packages, but honestly, yeah, I mean,
well, if someone is interested in helping you out, either, you know, as a contributor contributing code, or as a sustainer helping with, you know, all the other parts of package maintenance, what's your suggestion for them to kind of get in touch with you on the Slack group?
Yeah, absolutely. Join the Google Author Slack, which is on the website somewhere, and do GitHub issues. I think one thing that I'm trying to do instead of making packages is actually contribute more upstream. So contribute to the packages that I rely on, because that's actually more intimidating than making your own package. Because your own package is your own little kingdom, right? You can sit there and not worry about the code and, you know, all this. And if you're contributing to someone else's, it's sort of, you feel, oh, you know, are they going to like the flavor of my, you know, comments or something like that? But don't worry about that for especially, I'm sure for them it's the same, but for me, I don't, you know, please contribute. I will, anything you do is highly, highly appreciated. Documentation is like, as I said, it takes like 50% of the work. If you can just like correct a spelling mistake, it's highly appreciated. So at any level, or, you know, a completely different function that, you know, blows the mind out of your Google Analytics setup or something like that. So
yeah, that's well said. We will put all the links to how they can get in touch with, like you said, the Slack group and the various package sites so that they can easily get in touch with you about that. Yep.
Marvelous,
we almost certainly can't get through all the questions, but do we have time for a few more questions from the question list?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
I wish I could see them, Curtis. I can't see them.
No, I can't see anything. Yeah. I'm just relying.
Yeah. So as another question, so yeah, how do you create user authentication for accessing Plumber API, or so for example, Plumber API or Excel VBA, for example, on RStudio Connect? So sort of a question about user authentication using these APIs when it's deployed via Connect or something.
I don't know. Sorry.
If I had to venture a guess there, they would probably have to get into details about using HTTR for how you can link that to an API for authentication with, like you mentioned earlier, like OAuth 2 or other techniques.
Yeah, I think you can't. I think I've had this question before. You can't do it by OAuth 2 because I don't see how that would work for our Plumber API. I would use a service authentication, but I can't see. I can, yeah. I would actually, if you want authentication for an API, then I would, from a Google point of view, use Google Cloud Endpoints, which is a service that gives you authentication options. And you can use Plumber to generate a Swagger file, which will is compatible with Cloud Endpoints. And then Cloud Endpoints is a service that you can set this endpoint needs authentication and things like that. I haven't done it myself, so I can't sort of talk from experience, but that's the route I would look at. Let's leave that.
And then another question, touching on some of the points you had mentioned before, dealing with API errors and try catch. Do you have advice for gracefully handling API errors in your Shiny application? And I think the specific context is, a lot of people will develop a Shiny app that seems to work, they deploy it, then they share it, and then something happens in the future that starts to trigger some of these API exceeding. Do you have an advice or a pointer to kind of best practices for dealing with those types of?
Yeah, I mean, if it is a genuine error, you usually want to raise it, like a 500, But if you want to be more graceful in that, what you can do is if you return null in your try catch loop, and then you've got the require, and it's all in a reactive object, and then if you're doing require at the top of your dependencies on that object, then you will get the sort of graceful error you won't get the big red text, you'll get the text, the gray text, which is sort of loading or something like that, which require, or what was the thing before require? REQ, that one that you should
REQ and I've used validate need as well, but yeah.
And validate need, yeah, that was the first one, yeah. And that one you could use to customize the message so that you can have a kinder error message when things are going awry. So return null in your try catch loop if you really do want to suppress the error, and then use those rec or validate needs to make a nice message.
Cool. And so we won't have time to hit all the questions, and also just in case I didn't quite capture the essence of the question in my when I paraphrased it, I'll be sure to carry all this over to RStudio Community after the webinar and email it out to the full Shiny Dev.
Yeah, I can answer more questions on the forum, no problem. Yeah.
Sounds great. Cool. And yeah, I should pass it off back to Eric.
Well, this has been a real pleasure to get to know your insights, Mark, on the suite of these packages and the issues you've navigated to make sure that it's a robust experience, and really the potential of what you can do with these. I think it's a great showcase of how far we can take Shiny when we link it to these innovative and very sophisticated services with investment in time, sure, but then when we have people like you make these great packages for us, it gets us a lot easier to get involved, for sure. So we very much appreciate that. Yeah, and for those that want to keep up with what you're developing, what would be the best channels for them to follow your work?
I'm an avid Twitter user, so I tweet at least everything there, and I blog on the blog there. So when I get around to it every few months, I try and talk about what I'm doing on there. So
yep, I really enjoy your blog. You do some great write-ups about what we can do with R in a lot of these packages. So I highly recommend that reading.
It's really my niche at the moment. It's like how to scale R on Google Cloud Platform. That's kind of where I've ended up at the moment. So it's been fun. And then if you like codes, then follow me on GitHub maybe, or something like that, or just write me an email. I mean, I'm happy to answer emails.
Great. Well, we'll put the link to your GitHub profile and your blog in the post. And one little housekeeping item before we turn off the lights, so to speak, is that we've gotten some feedback from the audience for those that maybe can't always watch the video, but they kind of want to listen to the audio of the episodes on the go. I am proud to announce that as of earlier this week, we not only have the video recordings that you can get on the YouTube channel and link through shinydevseries.com, we also have audio feeds as well, and they are now available on at least 3 of our major podcast providers: Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Pocket Casts, and we're adding more as we speak. So that was we want to make sure that the content here is digestible and accessible through a lot of different means. So the audio version, if you'd like to have that, it's all yours for the taking now, and we'll be adding those as we go forward. And you can also get through this site, we also have direct link to the sign up page for the future webinars, And we also have a snapshot of the upcoming webinars here on this page as well. Our next one will be in August with David Grandjean to talk about the R interface project and a lot of the packages he's made around that. But as Curtis mentioned, we will have a dedicated post on the RStudio Community portal for this particular session with Mark, and we would love for you to keep the discussion going, and we will make sure we monitor that and provide answers as best we can. So that's from my housekeeping standpoint. Curtis, do you have any other remarks you want to leave us with before we sign off?
No, I think that was great. Thanks a lot.
All right. Well, again, my thanks to Mark for joining us. Really great insights, and we hope to obviously keep up with your efforts and see what you're working on in the future. And again, please feel free to reach out to Curtis and myself if you have feedback about the webinars and the developer series. We are definitely looking to make it as best as we can. So that's going to wrap it up for this episode, and we'll see you next time in August. Thanks a lot for joining, everybody.